Welcome to the entire plot of the Tandem Read from Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Part 15. Guys, we are so close to being done. It's actually kind of crazy. I feel like we've been doing this for forever. Today, we're going to be covering Empire of Storms chapters 57 through 59 and Tower of Dawn chapters 44 through 48, and we're actually going to be covering them specifically in that order. We start in Empire of Storms chapter 57 with a lead as she is walking towards Aelin Ashriver Galathinius, something that she has dreamed of for 10 years. And it's honestly this really emotional moment. And then she starts to get a little nervous because she realizes who's walking right next to her. Lorcan. It kind of sends a message, and Lorcan can tell that she's feeling this way, and she reassures him. She's like, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. However, something does start to bother her. She can just feel something is wrong, and she's looking around trying to figure out what could possibly be going wrong right now when she sees a mountain lion poised to pounce onto Lorcan. In an instant, Gavriel and Fenris have both launched a full attack against Lorcan, and it is ugly. Within an instant, Elide can tell that Fenris and Gavriel are not trying to harm him. They are not trying to disarm him. They are trying to kill him. It's a really intense couple minutes, and Fenris is about to land a killing blow when Elide jumps in front of Lorcan, and Fenris severs an artery in Elide's arm with his wolf teeth. Lorcan instantly shields him and Elide from both Gavriel and Fenris, and they themselves are holding back, trying to fight the blood oath to make sure that Elide is okay. However, because he severed an artery, she is bleeding out and she is not going to make it. Aelin, however, and the rest of the court have now run over because of the commotion caused by Gavriel and Fenris and Lorcan's fight, and Lorcan looks to Aelin and he begs her to heal Elide, but in order to do so, he will need to lift the shield off him and Elide. And in this moment, Lorcan truly does believe like he is sacrificing himself to die at the hands of Gavriel and Fenris for the sake of letting Elide live. Sure enough, though, the fight immediately stops the second Lorcan shield goes down because Rowan jumps in between everyone. He says, "This ends now. You two don't touch them. They're under the protection of Aelin Galathinius. If you harm them, it will be considered an act of war." Now, Lorcan in this moment refers to these as specific ancient words, the only way a blood order could be detained. Not overridden, just delayed for a little while to buy them all time. So, Rowan just kind of saved Lorcan's butt in this moment, which is crazy that Rowan would go out of his way to save Lorcan, given everything that's been going on between them. But at least in this moment, that means Elide can get taken care of. And also, in this moment, both Gavriel and Fenris are relieved when they are relieved from their duty of having to take down Lorcan, because they don't want to do it. Like, yes, they've all beefed and feuded over the years, and sometimes they can't stand each other, but they're basically like brothers who've just lived together for centuries. Sometimes they can't stand each other. Sometimes they do want to kill each other. However, they're like a family. They've done everything together. So they are beyond relieved that Rowan has spoken these words and at least muted their irresistible urge to kill Lorcan. Now let's jump to Elide's POV because, guys, she is meeting Aelin for the very first time. Aelin says, "I am alive today because of your mother. Your mother told me to tell you that she loves you very much." Those were her last words to me. And then Elide in that moment, guys, it's such an emotional part of the book. Like, honestly, it chokes me up every single time. But then Elide finally does the thing that she has been working for. Basically, this entire book, she gives Aelin the second word key. "I am here because of Kaltain Rompier. She said to give this to you. She said it was a payment for a warm cloak offered in a cold dungeon. They broke her and hurt her. She died alone in Morath. She died alone so I wouldn't. She said to remember your promise to punish them all, and said that you can unlock any door if you only have the key." And Aelin now turns to Lorcan, and she was like, "You mean to tell me that you knew what Elide was carrying this whole time and you still delivered her to me instead of taking the keys yourself?" This shocks Aelin, and it does help her kind of garner a little bit of trust with Lorcan in this moment. Lorcan chose Elide over Maeve. So that says a lot. And for that alone, she's gonna kind of feel out what's up with Lorcan these days. Elide is now fully healed, and Aelin claims her as Lady of Parenth. But then Manon steps forward and says, "No, I have claimed her as a witch." To which then Lorcan steps forward and he's like, no, I claim her for myself. That's pretty gutsy. Also, even Manon herself is like, dude, between the three of us, like, me and Aelin actually have a reason to claim her. You, however, no, like, that's not how this works. However, Aelin decides to allow it in this moment, but she does inform him that if he ever hurts a lead, she will melt his bones. To which Manon responds, and before she melts your bones, I will break every single one of your bones. So Elide has the two most powerful queens in the world, arguably, right now, with the exception of maybe Maeve. She has both of them, like, sworn to protect her. And so Elide and Lorcan and Aelin and all of her court and Manon proceed to head back where the lock was, or the chest that we think the lock is in. Empire of Storms chapter 58, this is actually in Dorian's POV as he realizes that Keltaine herself, Keltaine Rompier, okay, from the first book of the series, has quite literally changed the tide of this war. And he even actually starts to have a lot of shame and guilt because he literally turned a blind eye to the abuse that she was going through simply because he found her annoying. If anything, everyone is just kind of like, she kind of deserves it. She was a really crappy person. But no one, like, people thought the abuse was just the fact that she was power hungry and betrothed herself to a really disgusting man. And they all kind of saw that as like a consequence of her own actions and her own striving for power. But now they're seeing it for what it truly was, is that she really has been a victim this entire time. And despite the fact that they all turned a blind eye and let her be shipped off to Morath with this man, she, in her last and final moments, chose to save them all. Anyways, so Dorian's gonna sit with that for a good bit, but for now we head back to the chest that's on top of that altar in the ruins in the stone marshes with the word marks all over it. But we finally decide to open this chest, and sure enough, there is something inside of it, but it's not what Elena described the lock to be. It's actually a mirror. And tucked into the intricate iron frame of this mirror is the Eye of Elena, which we also just learned in part 14 is also a witch symbol. And this is when Manon tells us that it is most likely a witch mirror. So, we've only talked about these lightly in Crown of Midnight. Do you remember Baba Yellowlegs? She had this wagon full of mirrors, and we assumed it was like a maze of mirrors, you know, like you would see at a carnival. But we learned from Manon that Baba Yellowlegs was actually there to show the potential of witch mirrors to the King of Adarlan as a weapon in battle. You can see the future, past, and present. You can speak between mirrors if someone possesses the sister glass, and then there are the rare silvers, whose forging demands something vital from the maker. Other mirrors amplify and hold blasts of raw power to be unleashed if the mirror is aimed at something. This is what we're realizing was what Baba Yellowlegs was there to show the King of Adarlan back in Crown of Midnight, the second book of the series. They've been making towers. This is also the big mystery weapon that the matrons were discussing with the King of Adarlan back when Lysandra was originally going to be brought to Morath before she was rescued. Then Manon continues, it says they've been making towers, enormous yet capable of being hauled across battlefields lined with those mirrors, for Erewhon to use his power to incinerate your armies in a few blasts. However, this is not one of those mirrors. They're not exactly quite sure what this mirror is yet, but they're going to take it back to the ship and hopefully find out. But once they get closer to shore, they see Melisande ships in the distance, and Melisande has allied with Erewhon, so they start freaking out, especially when they see 20 warriors waiting for them along the shoreline, and one woman with a cloak on. Aelin's entire court starts panicking and thinking, should they run? Should they attack? What should they do? When Aelin just confidently walks straight to shore and meets the lady in the cloak. And it just so happens to be none other than Ansel of Briarcliff. So chapter 59. Remember in Queen of Shadows when Aelin dyed her hair red, and then Arobynn asked her to fight one of the Valg soldiers in the pits? She gave the name Ansel of Briarcliff. So apparently that got back to Ansel, and she saw that in a moment as Aelin summoning her. So she started heading towards Aelin at that time. And then something else happened, but we'll get there in a second. Because Manon walks up to where Aelin and Ansel have met, and there is instant tension, because I will remind you that Ansel is now Queen of the Western Wastes, which is the cursed witch lands that Manon is technically destined to bring the witches back to, since she's the last living Croatian queen. They all get back to the ship, and Manon's basically daydreaming of every possible way that she could slowly kill Ansel, when Ansel tells everyone basically what she's been up to and why she's there. So basically she was summoned, and so she started heading in the direction of Adderlin when Aelin actually sent Ansel a letter. Now, she sent this letter during her time at Skulls Bay, because remember, there was this moment where she saw the map and she saw Briarcliff and she was like, a lot of life debts owed to me over in the waste, so maybe I should send a letter. That was the moment she decided to write a letter to Ansel. After she got that letter, Ansel made a beeline for Melisande. Ansel conquered Melisande to the point where the ruler of Melisande ordered all of their fleet to join Ansel and now ally with Aelin. And so the rest of the Melisande troops that are currently at Morath allying Erewhon are about to beeline and head back to where Ansel is to aid Aelin instead. So bam, 2 allies in 1 right there. Now let's jump to Aedian's POV, because he's starting to feel a little stupid for doubting Aelin, and that whole thing about him being like, where are your allies, Aelin? This is where they are. They're now on the shore. But in this moment, he's also very angry at Aelin because, once again, she is keeping secrets. She is not sharing her plans. He then speaks up, however, as her right-hand general in this moment, and says that the group of Melisande that's coming from Morath, they should all head back to Terrasen for what they seem to be gearing up for is a big final battle. They want all of their troops to end up in Terrasen. Later that night, however, he's having a heart-to-heart with Lysandra, and they decide to have a "what are we" conversation. Now, a little bit of a side note during this conversation is that Aedian has noticed for the past couple days that Lysandra is acting odd. She seems off. She seems very much not herself. He can't really put a finger on what it is, but this conversation, everything seems pretty normal. So they're having a conversation of what are we, basically, because there's definitely something between them. And Aedian basically proposed marriage to her on the beach at Skulls Bay. So they're talking, and he says, we can figure it out, make no demands of each other beyond honesty. And given the fact that they're marching into a war, they decide that this is something that they can agree on. Now let's jump to Tower of Dawn, chapter 44, because Yrene and Chaol are enjoying the Oxara oasis. The royal family instantly heads to this big, giant pool at the center of the oasis. However, Yrene suggests that they go back to her tent to check on Chaol's spine. Remember, he was on a pretty rowdy horse for the entire journey, and they also raced a little bit just for fun, so she just wants to make sure he's all right. Of course, Chaol is fine, so they end up going to the pool area, but this is all a part of their plan that they just made in the tent. They're going to hang out a little bit around the pool area to not seem suspicious, and then Yrene's going to publicly declare that she wants to go on a walk to stretch her legs, and Chaol is going to offer to take her on that walk. They're going to use this as an opportunity to go towards this kind of jungle area off to the side and explore and look for some caves. They're chatting as they're walking through this jungle area, and off the bat, there's no way that there's going to be caves here. Not only do they not see caves, but this also isn't really the terrain for it. There's not really mountains. There's not really any rocky areas. However, they do come across some ruins. So they realize maybe these caves are really just an opening into these ruins. So they're exploring, looking around these ruins, and Chaol feels a slicing pain down his spine. He's about to say something to Yrene about it, but she sees something and it kind of distracts him, and he ends up not bringing it up to Yrene at all. She finds an engraving on the side of the ruins, and it is art depicting the Fae facing off with what looks like Valg creatures. Close by these inscriptions, they notice that there is actually an opening under a bunch of leaves and twine and a bunch of overgrowth from the jungle. So they decide that they're going to start looking around, and they just see tons and tons of word marks. Now, Chaol is under the impression that all of the Fae lived in Dornael, with the exception of one group that followed Brannon all the way to Terrasen. But other than that, there is no other case of immigrated Fae that they really know about in their history. But this place clearly belonged to the Fae. These are the ruins of a Fae homeland. And this is when things start to really click, not only for Chaol, but for Yrene as well. Basically, Healers come to the southern continent to learn the art of healing because healing magic thrives here. There is only one other place that healing magic absolutely thrives, and that is Dornael, basically where the Fae are. What if healing is an actual Fae magic? Kale says, I was sent here to retrieve an army, but I wonder if some other force brought me to retrieve something else. To which Yrene responds, perhaps that is why whoever it is that's been stalking the Tor was haunting me. If they are indeed sent from Morath, they don't want us realizing any of this through healing you. So they decide in this moment that all of this is going to tie back to healing as a Fae magic to fight the Valg, because the Fae have fought the Valg in the past and won well before Elena and well before Gavin. So they decide they're going to go back to the Tor and they're going to show the scrolls to Hafizia. Now this is scary because they don't really want more people knowing about the scrolls. The less people that know about the scrolls, the better, right? But Hafizia is dedicated, okay? Actually, her name is Hafiza. Have I been saying Hafizia? Hafiza. I'm so sorry. What? I don't know where Hafizia came from. Anyways, Hafiza. She has dedicated her life to knowledge and history. And if she has been studying the history of healers, she might know about these Fae and she might know about the scrolls. Better yet, what if she knows how to read word marks? So they decide that they're going to enjoy the birthday festivities tonight, but first thing in the morning, they're heading back to the Tor to show the scrolls to Hafiza. Kale will also send for Nesrin and tell her to come back, and basically says, we're going to figure out the info that we need and bring it back to Aelin and Dorian. And you know what? We might not even need the Cognate and his armies if the information that we think we know ends up being correct. And the reason why I'm not spelling out for you fully what they think they know is because it will be spelt out a little bit later. But let's just say if they're correct, it could change the tide of the war. So they go back to this big birthday feast planned for the night at the Oxara Oasis, and it doesn't take long for war conversation to come up because apparently this is the potential heir's favorite dinner conversation. However, they bring up all this stuff to shake Kale. Like, it's fun for them. They like to see Kale squirm. They like to bother him. They like to frustrate him. But he's not bothered by any of this. And it's because Kale genuinely believes in this moment that he does not need the Cognate and their armies anymore, so he doesn't have to humor them. Hussar, however, can pick up that Kale isn't bothered and doesn't feel the need to please them, and this bothers her. So she decides that she's gonna start really pushing some buttons, and she's gonna say some really unhinged stuff. So she suggests that Aelin, mind you, she knows that Aelin and Kale were lovers at one point, so she thinks maybe this will, hit a soft spot for him. So she suggests that Aelin marry one of her brothers, and then they might be more inclined to help with this war. And Kale just laughs at her. He's like, first of all, do you honestly think any one of you could handle Aelin? Which, good point, not a single one of them could. And then he also says, tough luck, because she's already in love with someone else. And they're like, oh, Dorian? Like, are her and Dorian officially going to be a thing? Are they going to have a strong marriage alliance? To which he says, no, actually, you didn't hear? She's actually in love with Prince Rowan Whitethorn of Dornael. And they're all shocked because Rowan's a legend. Everyone knows who Rowan is, but not only that, none of their spies learned anything about her and Rowan, so this is a shock to them. Kale then goes as far as to say that they're Karanom, which means that he is only heightening Aelin's power by them being together, and then also shares that she stole Rowan right in front of Maeve from his blood oath to her, and now he is blood sworn to Aelin. Hussar realizes that this conversation is not only putting Kale in a good mood, but it's also putting Aelin in a really positive light, so naturally she decides to shift the conversation because she cannot have that. She has to be the most powerful person in the room. So she suggests then that Kale give Yrene a title within Aderlin's court, and then she can be their healer on high, and then she'll be really powerful, and then she'll just have Yrene marry Caution, and then maybe they'll be willing to help them in the war. Yrene is highly uncomfortable because Caution and Kale are now kind of squaring each other up, and she just makes a joke about how odd dinner conversation this is for a birthday party, and Hussar's like, you know what, you're right, and then they switch conversations to something else entirely. Yrene out of just like wanting this dinner to be over, she is just drinking as much wine as humanly possible to try to like get through the night. And at the end of the night, after dessert, Kale's like, all right, I'm going to take you back to your tent. So he helps Urine up, and they're about to turn to start heading towards her tent when Hussar makes one last final joke and comment about Aelin. And Urine, she's had it. So she turns around and she lunges at the Princess Hussar, pushing her chair and her into the Oxara Oasis pool. Tower of Dawn, Chapter 45. Urine is standing there after everyone around her has just pulled their swords out and is waiting for Hussar to order Urine to be killed. Urine is truly in this moment thinks that she is witnessing her last moments, and it is dead silent as everyone is waiting for a reaction from Hussar when Reyna, Hussar's girlfriend, just loses it. Like, she just starts crying, laughing. Then Caution shortly joins in after, and Hussar is like, you know, Urine, I wondered when you would grow a backbone finally. And then Reyna helps Hussar out of the pool, and they start walking back to Hussar's tent. Kale and Urine in this moment realize that Hussar is very temperamental, and they're not going to wait around for her mood to change. So they're just going to be thankful that Hussar didn't order Urine to be killed, and they book it to Urine's tent. Urine and Kale are in shock, and they're just like trying to process what in the world just happened at that dinner. But Kale is mostly amused. Urine is panicking, but Kale is like, that was hysterical. Your temper might be almost as bad as Aelin's. And hearing her name actually kind of sparks a conversation with Urine. Kale explains their history to Urine because she hasn't really asked. Like, she obviously heard from Hussar that they used to be a thing, and so Kale kind of explains not only the state of their relationship, but also the state of how their relationship ended and how it ended very tragically. But then Kale slips in this moment that he does not love Aelin anymore. The person that he thought he loved was Selena, and she does not exist anymore. He loved Selena, and she's gone. She wasn't real, not really. Urine seems reassured, and then he decides to slip in there last second that, by the way, I don't love Nesserin either. Crazy! And then he hands her her birthday gift. And it's really cute. It's a silver locket with her initials engraved on it. And then on the other side, there's like a sea and mountains and whatever. And he says that the locket opens, and he's hoping that this little piece of paper that she's been clearly keeping in the pockets of her dresses that she's always fiddling with, he's like, I don't know what that piece of paper is, but it's clearly special to you. And I got you a necklace that would fit that piece of paper in it so that you don't have to carry it around in your dress all the time. And she responds that she's really glad that he does not love Aelin or Nesserin. And then they get jiggy with it. Tower of Dawn, Chapter 46. The next morning, Urine decides that she is going to tell Kale about the night in Inish that changed everything for her and got her here to the southern continent. And of course, we already know this story because we read about it in Assassin's Blade in the short story, The Assassin and the Healer. She basically tells the story of how Selena came to the inn that she was working at, saved her life, taught her how to protect herself, and then left her with all of the money that she needed to get to the southern continent to become a healer. And that she also left a note with her. And that is the piece of paper that she has been carrying around all these years. And it says, for wherever you need to go and then some, the world needs more healers. To which Kale's response is, after he hears everything, he is so just grateful that this happened because he wouldn't have met her otherwise, right? And he says, whoever she is, I will be forever grateful. But he doesn't know that it's Aelin. Aelin is responsible for bringing him and Urine together, and he doesn't even know it. Tower of Dawn, Chapter 47. Let's check in on Nesserin and Sartok because last we checked, they were actively running away from 6 Karankui. So they're running and running and running. Sartok is practically bleeding out because, remember, he took the brunt of that fall pretty bad. And they're also in desperate need of water because they've been running nonstop through the mountains. Nesserin's leading the way through a particularly narrow path in the mountain pass, and she barely makes it through. Sartok, however, is built very different. He's a lot more bulky and muscly, and he cannot make it through. The Karankui are also not far behind. He actually, in this moment, tells Nesserin to leave him and save herself. But, of course, obviously that's not Nesserin's style, so she's pulling and pulling and pulling on him, and he's trying to get through, but eventually, as the Karankui get really close, he stops trying, and he says, I heard the spies' stories of you, the fearless Balruni woman in Adarlan's empire, Neith's arrow, and I knew I loved you before I set my eyes on you. I just wish we had time. Okay. And then he is ripped away by the Karankui. Nesrin does not have time to process this. Like, this man just confessed his love to her and then got ripped away. And so she just keeps running, and she's just like running on pure adrenaline. And then she gets an idea. She takes a couple seconds to tell her idea to Falcon, who is still in her pocket as a mouse. And then she stops so that the Karankui can catch her. Chapter 48, she wakes up eventually, wrapped in spider silk, and she's in some sort of a cave of sorts, and Sartok is next to her unconscious. She wakes up in this moment because she can feel Falcon, as a mouse, is actually biting through the spider silk that is keeping her wrapped up. Then one of like the biggest and oldest Karankui that they have seen yet comes up to them, so Falcon goes like behind her back, and he's like trying to undo her spider silk bindings while being inconspicuous, of course, because they don't want the Karankui to catch on that Falcon's there. And Nesrin basically tries to beg for mercy, and she's like, no, you don't understand. We were just hired by a shifter who did a deal with one of these Stygian spiders, and we thought maybe he could make another deal with the Karankui to get his youth back. To which the Karankui says that they do not do trades with humans. That's something only the Stygian spiders do. Instead, they wait. That's what they do. They just wait. And Nesrin is like, wait for what? This is so crazy. The Karankui points towards a gate and says, we wait for her dark majesty to return. Her. Okay, not his. So we're not talking about Erewhon here. We wait for her dark majesty to return. We wait for the queen of the Valg. We've heard of 3 kings. This is the first time we've heard of a queen. We wait for the queen of the Valg, who in this world calls herself Maeve. Guys, Maeve is a Valg queen. Think about it. This changes everything. That is possibly the worst place to stop this, but that is the end of part 15. You are just going to have to stick around for chapter 16. If you are not caught up already, you absolutely need to, and this playlist is the best place to do it. And of course, you should subscribe so you get notified whenever I post a brand new entire plot episode.